Okay.
Okay, welcome to the podcast, Mack Horton. We were just talking off air, and I said that I was taking extra precautions to make sure I press record because I lost the recording. You asked when did I figure that out, and I said
Yeah.
at the very end. And to leave you hanging, I said it's a person not unrelated to you. So for the listeners in both instances, those that aren't aware of who you are, and I'll give a bit more of a detailed synopsis, but you are the Olympic champion for the 400 meters freestyle from the Rio Olympic Games. The person I spoke to was the 400-meter champion in track and field from the same Olympic Games, Wade Van Niekerk. And we had a great chat and we got all the way through. And I went to press stop recording and my heart fell out my asshole.
I can't imagine that feeling. But
Hopefully a
you do
lesson like you only need to learn once, and
once.
I do thoroughly believe in, you learn the hard way. Like
Yeah, that is
that's still learning,
that's the hardest way.
Yeah. So brutal. And so we
How
are
did they
recording.
react? How did they react when
Uh he I well, I couldn't tell him then, actually, because I couldn't say
Oh,
because
by the way.
he'd opened up
Yeah.
a bit on some stuff. Like there was, I think verbatim, he said, I haven't spoken about this publicly before. So that sort of stuff. And then so he felt like maybe it seemed like it was somewhat cathartic for him.
Yeah.
So I was just gonna let it be, and then just immediately told my wife and was like, felt like the biggest idiot on earth, but was personally heartbroken. And
Maybe it was never meant to be public unless you've re-recorded it. And
maybe
it's
I did like own up. I had to sort of give it a full 24 hours, and I DM'd him to say, "Hey mate, like so sorry," and he just said, "Well, it was a good therapy session." So
and free.
at least I think he saw the maybe the upside in it.
Yeah.
But we are talking. It is recording. So um, I tend to want to get people on the podcast that I'm interested in talking to, and in principle, it's about training. In that it's a big portion of at least a portion of the life of the people I'm talking to in one way or another. So as an athlete, it's this thing that takes up a chunk of time
Yeah.
for an intense period of time, but it also doesn't start there and it doesn't end there.
Yeah.
And there's also realistically the reasons for the training, which is the most interesting thing. So none of it happens in a vacuum, but it's a good pretense to have a conversation with anyone,
Yeah.
especially if I've known they've put in some hard graft, which if you're a swimmer, you certainly have.
I don't know. I compared to rowers, I don't know. I've seen you do some pretty crazy things. Uh,
Well, it's all context, right? Because
yeah.
I was thinking, and I think about this whenever I contemplate swimming, because I think it's something that I know it's not something I think, it's a thing my kids will do and not just learn to be able to swim, but swim laps because I've seen it show up as this kids that swum seriously enough that there was a reason to do a decent amount of volume
Yeah.
that seems to have endowed them with these aerobic attributes. So a lot of rowers, I'm not sure if you're aware, they swum when they were at school.
Yeah.
And then it seems like this thing that permeates their athletic ability. And I think it's something to do with the fact that you have to control your breathing. And when else as a teenager or a preteen would you have to do that?
Yeah, never. I
Never.
reckon it's the controlling of the breathing, but then it's also it's whatever you have to unlock mentally as well, because it's such people think it's a very isolated sport. I think it's less isolated than it actually is, because for me, the social element is just doing something with a group of people. But there is like in the swimming world, you do unlock this ability to push yourself and go
Yeah.
within yourself, which I think is also transferable to anything like rowing. And I remember at school, I reckon every rowing season, the coaches would try and poach me. I'm like, no, no, no. I'm swimming. I'm still
It,
swimming.
it was one of my questions because you went to a rowing school and there's some conflicting information. You're either 190 or 195 centimeters, so somewhere in there. You're like
191. I don't know. Yeah.
191.
Yeah.
That's actually a right on the cusp at which they would talent ID you for rowing.
I would have loved to have rowed,
Yeah.
but I really like swimming a
Yeah.
lot. Like if I think back on like an Olympic sport that I was going to do that wasn't swimming,
Yeah.
or if I was going to have a serious crack at another sport, rowing is the one, just because I mean, there's a technical element, but a lot of it is just the engine, which is what I love so much about swimming as well.
Yeah. Do you think that you could have, in some other context, if it was the same personality, not necessarily the same physical attributes, that it could have been another sport? Or do you think that because the right combination of events, if you love the sport and you clearly have and always did, were endowed with the genetic traits to be able to do it at the highest level, which is kind of and then the personality to want to do all the work that's required is a bit of a perfect storm.
Yeah. So what else would I do is the question.
Well, I mean, do you think, gee, that was bloody lucky, like because you're in the right country for it, and when
I
I think you think
yeah.
of democratic sports, running and maybe soccer is really accessible, but in Australia at least, swimming is like that in that everyone swims growing up, and it's a school sport, and so everyone's exposed to it. So if you're any good at it, that talent will be exposed pretty early.
Yeah. It would blow my mind often that this was the thing that I got to do. I got to swim in a hole in the ground full of water. And there's people that don't even have clean drinking water. And I'm born in this country with this talent and this opportunity and the family that I have and access to like to find a coach or whatever that can get you through the system and progress you. Even the odds of that, I think, are so hard and so difficult. Or to have a family that can support you in whatever you're trying to do.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, it like I reckon every time I was about to go on a international trip, like a Worlds or an Olympics, and you start to taper off and your mind starts to go a bit crazy, I'd just be swimming up and down and like, how silly is this? Because I can go from one end of this hole to the other end. I get to get on a plane and go do it somewhere else.
People will care,
Yeah.
like people care
Yeah.
enough to, pay for the flight, and this
Yeah.
justifies not your existence, but it
It's
means that there's
nuts.
actual support staff that have a career based on helping you swim back and forth
Yeah. Well,
in
that's
the
another
hole.
element. There's
Yeah.
people that have jobs because I can do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what stage that kick in terms of not like the realization of all of that, but then the gratitude for it all?
I think probably like 17, 18.
Okay.
I think the catalyst for it was that, I was going through school, trying to balance homework and school load and then training load and like having to make decisions about where I was spending my time. Was it doing school stuff? Was it seeing friends after school? Or was it swimming? And for me, it was always a choice of like, I enjoy swimming and I love swimming. So that's where I put my energy. And then over time, you kind of see those choices pay off because you get opportunities to travel and compete internationally. Um, and so I think as soon as I started getting exposure to the possibilities of where the sport could take you, that's when the gratitude sets in because it's like I'm grateful that I am able to put my time towards this. I'm grateful I can make decisions that will put me in that direction. And I just get exposure to these unreal opportunities that not everyone else gets.
Seems like right about the time it was a profession for you, which is when it's starting to come with some expectations, but you've been taking it pretty seriously already. And you must have felt like your focus was being rewarded because if it went tits up, you weren't any good when you were 18, or you got injured and then couldn't pursue it at the highest level, then people would be looking back like, well, maybe that was a unwise decision, but you went with your passion, which not
Yeah.
everyone's able to do when they're at school.
Yeah, that's a good point. And as you were saying that, I was thinking like at any point did I think it would go tits up? And I like it does most days probably in some way or most meets in some way. But it was never like that's never what I'm doing it for is the outcome or whatever. I was just doing it
Yeah.
because I loved the training and I loved the process and I love pushing myself. Um, so it was never like oh, what happens if this goes wrong? It's like this is what I enjoy doing, so I just
Yeah.
keep doing
Especially
it.
when you're young. And just to frame it for our listeners and our viewers and to substantiate my research prior to this conversation, you had a pretty aggressive acceleration to the highest level of performance. So you're national champion by 13. Does that feel about right?
I like how you say feel because I actually have no idea. I'll say
Yeah,
it feels about
well,
right.
that's just
Yeah.
because your face indicated a lack of certainty. So let's go with yes.
Yeah.
And then by 17, you won at 17, you won 5 medals at World Juniors, 5 gold medals and a silver. So you won the 2, 4, 8, 15, and we're in the 4x1. So that's a big chunk of improvement. And you're asserting yourself nationally, but then by 17, you're at least in terms of for your age at the very top of the pile. And then you're going to prove that wasn't a fluke by 18. You won Commonwealth Games silver in the 15 and then were fourth in the 400. The following year, the Senior World Championships, you got a silver in the 800, which is not an Olympic event. And I wouldn't say that would set you up typically for the year that was to come, in which at the 2016 Olympic Games, you won the gold medal and you also came fourth in the 1500. So Olympic gold medalist by 20, even in swimming where there's a lot of early progress, or that does seem to be for women more than men.
Yeah.
You've gone from a kid to top of the pile in a matter of years. When you were 13, was that when you were competing in swimming? Was that the goal or was it just let's just do this and enjoy it?
The goal was always enjoy it, train as hard as I could. And I wanted to be the best that I could be, but it was never like I must win an Olympic gold medal. Um, one thing I did I must have been age 14 because I reckon that's when they started having the national age records.
Mm.
My event at the time was the 1500-meter freestyle, and so I went on the database, which was less easy to do back in the day.
Yeah.
Um, and I
Yes.
got every national age group record for the 1500 meters from 14 through to 18. And it's, Kieran Perkins, Grant Hackett, printed them out with the times, everything, stuck it on my ceiling above my bed. And because it was like this, at this young age, you're trying to figure out what is the best way to get the best out of yourself or what is the best pathway.
Yeah.
Um, and it was like just copy what other people have done really well.
Especially when it's gone well for them. And
Yeah.
in that event in this country, there's something to aim for. But it does seem like at least the people that you were aiming at, there's this balance of extrinsic motivation. You're focusing on your rate of getting better, but you're also paying attention to this external measurement, which is the people at your age previously. But those people happen to be
Yeah.
these people that go on to win.
Maybe if
At,
they weren't Grant Hackett or Kieran Perkins, I would have had to have gone like international age group record or something. But it just so happened that in Australia, the caliber was enough that it was world class.
yeah,
And the motivation was I mean, I was still motivated to knock them off and take their record, but it's not like that was the be all or end all. It's like this is the pathway, and if I can get as close as they did to it, then I'm probably on track.
and was there
Um,
anyone that you were talking to about this, either coaches or family, to sort of triangulate how should I approach this other than just going to training?
Yeah, probably coaches for like the data and input from what they've seen from the greats.
Mhm.
And then definitely family. The best thing about my time at school when I was driving from the pool to training was that every morning between the pool, I had 30 minutes in the car from pool to school, and it was just like 30 minutes locked in with dad. He would just tell me whatever he wanted, push all his life values down my throat, set me up. He like I didn't even have to say anything. It would just like there's just so much input that it and eventually it lands.
Sort of washed over you,
Yeah.
some stuck.
And I'm sure one of these points was like figuring out a pathway, and the best way to do it is to look at what everyone else is or what the best are doing, and make it your own.
And do you remember sitting in the car with him, and do you feel like you were receptive to that at the time, or you just, yeah, you're locked in there literally, so like you're not going to be rude. And so I don't know your dad, I don't, everyone's got their own relationship with their parents, but some kids are like, oh, my dad's a legend and I'm totally up for this, and some are like, yeah, okay, dad. And then over time, they realized there was some wisdom to it. And part of the reason I'm asking is I'm almost certainly going to do this to my son. So I want to know just more information on how well it lands.
Well, it landed well. I think
Yeah.
there's definitely times where, as a teenage boy with like typical teenage boy brain, you don't appreciate it and you just don't want anything of whatever's going on in the world. But once you come through it, it all
Mm.
makes sense and
So
you
this is a bit
appreciate it.
retrospective. You're seeing some of the benefit of
Yeah,
this. Yeah.
I
Okay.
think definitely, 17, 18, like the last couple of years of being on my L's or whatever, I appreciated it more. You've kind of come through it and it's become so routine and ingrained that it's like if I needed advice or perspective on anything, it's like, oh well, that you bring it up in the car or you just go to
Mhm.
him because we're used to having these conversations all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Um, which makes it easier, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. I mean, I bought it. So there's, I bought it for 10 to I think year 5 to year 12. So
yeah.
there's a, it's just different. So that, something that it
Who do
just
you
as easily not be there.
yeah.
Yeah.
If you were after those conversations then, or after guidance or whatever,
Mm.
who did you turn to then? Is it like classmates or is it
Well,
teachers or
parents are still like, they're always just a phone call away, but some of it, when you're sitting, they say this thing, especially with men, that if they're sitting not facing one another, but actually next to each other, that's more encouraging of conversation. And sometimes that can be stifled between sons and fathers because of whatever reasons. That's probably not, we're not going to get into the weeds on that today. Um, but when you're at school, that becomes the boys, especially an all boys school. It's not even what's said. It's kind of the tone of the place and then what is seen as valued, and trying to find a place within the school that where you can feel, I'd imagine, successful or accepted or whatever your place is.
yeah.
And sports a good vehicle for that. And so I think I just in sport, even there was, to begin with, big patches in rowing. Even in rowing, there was my first 3 seasons of rowing, we didn't win a single race,
Yeah.
not one. So there was like, it couldn't have been high performance that was the reason it keeps showing up. I think it was like the process, and you're doing it with your mates and you're getting better, which is rewarding. And you also know that within certain schools, when there's this first 8 or first 15, first 11, whatever it is, that's seen as something worth aspiring to. And I was in for that hook, line, and sinker. And then it was just a matter of figuring out, well, what does that look like, and how do I get better in this? And my I derived a lot of benefit from the training that I did outside of, once I realized that I could do more than just show up to training. So if there's 3 afternoons a week or 2 afternoons a week, whatever it is for a certain sport,
Yeah.
there's that. And you should try as well as you can within those events. But then there's stuff you can do outside of that to accelerate your rate of progress relative to your peers. And that insight is sort of both how I got good at sport and um, turned me into a bit of a psychopath because then you're like, then that becomes, well, that's how I get better at a thing is I just work harder over here, which is not always
Yeah.
that useful.
I wonder if this could be just on a tangent, but like
We're here for
in that
tangents.
yeah, in that
Yeah.
boarding context, is there boarding and sport, is there a world where you're thinking like I have to be this sort of human and these sort of values to be better at the sport and to fit in more with the team? And does that then shape you as well?
It was
Or
never fit in with the team. It was like going in as a small fish in a big pond and then insisting like I will be a big fish.
yeah,
And and then by the time I was, then I was very much focused externally on, or just on like in competition, and I wasn't deriving like a sense of superiority. If anything, it felt like, well, I did that thing I assumed I would do, but then by the time I was there, it was just doing it, you know. But
yeah,
then that probably by then was taking it pretty seriously. Like I remember having afternoon training and spending a good portion of the day at school, not shitting myself, but now I'd look back and go anxious or at least anticipating that the session needed to go perfectly or thereabouts, or there was going to be a problem.
yeah,
And there was a coach and 8 other guys, weather, all sorts of variables that I couldn't account for that may make it imperfect, but that wasn't what I was paying attention to. When you must have been taking it perhaps not in that way, because I don't think everyone, that's not a healthy approach. And so I hope most people would avoid that. But you must have been separating from your peers at some stage pretty aggressively at school in terms of training volume, in terms of results. Did you felt some separation, or when you were at school, you're like, I'm normal, and then you go and do this thing elsewhere?
I don't know that I ever felt normal at
Okay.
school,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Okay.
And uh I don't know, the examples of separation there, you said results. I never thought of a separation in results. It was just like swimming and school were such different worlds
Yeah.
because I think like if you were to look at a rowing program, it's probably embedded in the school a bit more, whereas swimming
Oh,
is very much based around external clubs. And if you're an external club, then you can probably just come in and swim for the school when you need to or want to.
is that if
And
you're very good, or is it because I'm trying to think to the good swimmers in my school, and they maybe they
yeah,
would, you know, it's only like there's really good kids doing club swimming, and they go to the schools that they go to, and they swim for them when it suits. But realistically, the they're over here at a club learning how to be fast in this really great culture of swimming performance that we have.
yeah, you have to reach, in my experience anyway, it might be different now, but like reach a level where the training externally would just supersede training at school, and
Yeah.
that's often a conversation with your coach and your school and whatever, because it's you get to a point where you're doing 9, 10 swim sessions a week, and they're all planned out meticulously by your coach. And it's like if you're swapping one of them for a school swimming session, then they're just not having a bar of that.
So does it mean no other school sport either past a certain point?
Past probably year 8. I reckon I did
Right.
cross country like
Yeah.
two years, and
Yeah.
I was horrendous at it because I can't run. Um, and then yeah, swimming just kind of took over everything.
I
Um,
mean, even that, like that early specialization is pretty serious just because of what it involves. And I don't, I think there's a you could go in circles around whether or not it's a sacrifice if you do it willingly and would do so retroactively, but it is a choice that is being made to do this thing instead of all of these other things. Like a normal childhood or at least a normal adolescence is off the table at that stage.
Yeah, and it's a gamble because, like, even in the sporting context, you're giving up pretty much every other sporting ability and putting it
Yeah.
in one basket. And it's funny when I think back to like my time at school, I don't reflect and think I was a sporty kid because I could never catch a ball or throw a ball.
Yeah.
I didn't play soccer or footy at lunch or whatever because I was too tired from training. Um, and the swimming world was just so separate that it was like in the context of school, I was never a sporty kid or a sporty student. It was just like this separate
But there
thing.
must have been, every would have been once or twice a year for you. They would have got you up at assembly and say, Max done this awesome thing. And everyone would have been pumped up because, you're one of them. And well, at least at my school, if you'd went to my school, even if we never saw you swim, we would have been fired up that you were and that you were good at it. Did you have any of that?
A little bit, but I avoided it if I could.
How come did you just not want the attention?
Not really, not at
Yeah.
all. The the only time I probably lent in was like through school swimming competitions, and it
Yeah.
was like,
Well, you just wanted to maul everyone and like go home.
well, and I wanted the team to do well. At my
Yeah,
school, we
okay.
came
Yeah, yeah.
for 6 years, we came second, and then in year 12, finally won the final night, and it was
Okay.
just like
So you're like anchoring all of the relays and
as many as I could. They
yeah,
cap your entries.
is that right?
But you have like, I don't know, 150, 200 kids from the school in the stands. They're jumping up and down, going crazy. Um,
So if that was your normal by the time you were 13 or 14, when did you start and how did you start?
I only started at 10-ish, probably, which I don't know, depends who you ask, but that's probably kind of late. Some start around 8 or 6. Um, but it probably took me a while to get into it because I was scared of the water. I didn't want to put my head under for ages. I remember we were doing swimming lessons in PE at school for like a term or whatever. It's like the swimming
Yeah.
program, and got through the 8 sessions or whatever it is. The last 3 minutes of the last session, finally, I still remember like pushing myself under off the wall. Um, and then I was just, hey, this isn't bad, and just like fell
Okay.
in love with this world. Um, and then I think from there, mum just like enrolled me in learn to swim, squad sort of things, and you just naturally progress your way through. Um, and I don't know, it got to a point where, you'd move up the squad, the kids are slightly older, you'd still be keeping up, but then it's like, oh, I just want to chase them down. And I don't want to lead because I want to go at the back and I want to overtake as many as I could. Like I would have been an absolute pain in the bum to train with.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but it comes from a good place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
They would have seen the talent too, so they're like, we'll put up with this little asshole.
yeah,
But
probably.
it's still like of the people I've spoken with so far, the people I know, we have all these talent ID systems and no one's been talent ID'd. It's always normally some sort of freak occurrence where your mum, like you're like, I like swimming. And they're like, okay, well, guess we'll sign
Yeah.
you up here. Was it literally like a local pool?
Local pool, 3 minutes around the corner. Harold Holt swimming pool, named after the Prime Minister that got lost at sea, which is a
Yes.
fitting name for a swimming pool.
Those non-Australians should look into Harold Holt because what a ridiculous story. It's just so quaint. Different time, but still, it's
Yeah.
somewhat ominous for a pool though. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you signed up the local pool. It just
I just like progressed through the learn to swim squads there, probably hit like the highest squad, and maybe they swim 4 times a week. So
as like a
mod
10-year-old.
Yeah, probably
Say
11-ish.
11. Okay, 11.
So like moderately serious. But then I think in Australia there's a gap between like that learn to swim level and then the squad level, and there's very rarely is there a link that joins them, unless your high performance squad also feeds into a swim school, which
Right.
probably not many do.
Yeah.
Or you're in a school system that has a swimming club adjoined to it. It's very hard to find that link. And
So
so
how did you
mum,
overcome? Yeah, well, great.
yeah, my mum was just like, okay, well, what do I do now? And I think she was just looking for swimming clubs in Melbourne nearby, trying to figure out what the best one sort of was. But then there's no easy way to enroll, or like it's not that clear. And so she moved me to the swim school that was based at the same pool that the swimming club she wanted me to go to was at. Which makes sense, but
Yeah.
still no direct link
Yeah.
between them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So you kind of had
and
to figure it out.
yeah, and I
Yeah.
think potentially it's getting slightly better now, but when I was doing it, it was messy. And so I was just swimming in, like I learned to swim squad one day, and the head coach from that club saw me swimming, pulled me out, said, come over here and, show me your freestyle, whatever. Did a
That's
couple of
what it
laps.
was.
That's what it was.
He
And then,
saw,
yeah,
he saw the talent.
yeah. So
Ah.
again, another fluke with
I
no
loved
formal
like
talent
people
ID.
when they recognize talent. It's like I get this. It's I'll get my hairs will stand up when I even hear of a realization of talent because I probably wanted that so much for myself, but never had the talent that anyone with. Bloody hell, that's there's never a moment like that. But I believe in it, and I think swimming would be the perfect sport because I reckon you either have the qualities for it or you don't. And the part of the freakiness of this all going the way that it did is that, by your own admission, not sporty. But I think that the funny side of swimming is that it's a great sport for any aspiring athlete to do when they're young. But swimmers at the top level, their qualities don't really transfer much to other sports. So you've got some swimmers that become triathletes, but that still starts with a swim
Yeah.
and is heavily engine dependent. But outside of that, it's very rare, and there's some very weird body types that have to do with very specific shapes of the feet, shapes of the hips, shapes of the shoulders, and you either have it or you don't. And I'd imagine having just a natural way of swimming, regardless of how you've been taught, is going to be there recognizable by someone that knows what they're looking at. So is this a guy that stuck around, or was this the guy for right then to get you on the track that you needed to be?
I think he was on and off probably my whole career, like still in contact with him, but he ultimately set me up with the coach that I did 14 years with and
Okay,
won
cool.
Olympic gold with. But I think like to what you were talking about before, when he was spotting talent, it wasn't like aerobic capability or anything. He would literally just see that you're a person that understands how to hold water.
Yeah.
And that's the foundation of swimming. You understand how to hold water, you understand how it works, you understand the technique required and how
Did
to
you
move
know that
through
you
it.
knew that?
I think I was piecing it together because I don't know, you get little clues, little bits of feedback um, that lead you to believe that, and it's like actually understanding, interpreting coaches' technical advice. Like, not I don't know that everyone can do that,
No,
particularly at a young age. It
especially
becomes
boys.
Yeah, it becomes clear if you're able to process that or if people aren't and they just tune out or whatever because they're
Yeah.
a young
Or they've
teenage
got
boy.
this ego thing where it's like they don't want to onboard it because it feels like a challenge. And so instead of just taking the information and trying to actualize it, they're having this struggle that doesn't need to be
Yeah.
happening. So if you just don't have that resistance, if you're like, yep, yep, it's an attitude thing, which goes to personality and also how you were raised. So it's not just that you have this frame, but you've got the a technical willingness as well. So know that this isn't a sport where you just swim up and down, but that there's a how you go about it.
Yeah. And then I think that like there is an element of I can feel the water. And for some people, they can see that people can feel the water.
Yeah.
And I reckon, like, if you were to sit down and watch an Olympic trials or an Olympics or whatever, you you would be able to look and see who can feel the water the best. Like
Yeah.
it can be obvious, but I reckon picking it up at a young age is like to be able to spot it at a young age is impressive.
So the thing with Thorpe, right, in that
Yeah, well,
you
exactly.
could see it, and then I think when everyone saw him swim for non-swimmers, they could go, "Well, that looks how's that?"
Crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
but then I also watched your final in the 400 from Rio today, and it does still seem with good swimmers that as you go into the line, you expect to see this increase in turnover. But I'd imagine there's a real discipline to not do that. You've got to stay with the process and actually you're propelling yourself, not just increasing cadence. Like that's not the goal.
Yeah. Funny you say that because I did a clinic over the weekend and a guy was asking me like, how do you stay smooth at the back end of a 1500 or whatever? And I was saying when I was training, like technique was always my number one.
Mm.
We used to have this saying, tough, TUF, technique under fatigue.
Mm.
And so it was like if you're doing a set of
It's great.
30 100s or something at pace, that last 25. Sorry, someone's FaceTiming. That's so annoying that they came through.
It's all right.
That last 25 where you're starting to fall apart into the wall, that is when you have to focus on technique the most. And instinctively, you want to go short, you want to rate harder because you want to go faster, but you actually need to go longer, maintain the technique. Um, and that's where you lock that in because like when it's all turning to crap in a race or you're
Yeah.
absolutely buggered, that's what you'll fall back on is that last
Yeah.
25 repeat you've been doing in training every single day.
Yeah, that's the muscle memory. Is like what you do under fatigue is what is the pattern that you're most likely to have under fatigue. Like
Yeah, yeah,
right. And then it's like that perfect, practice makes perfect, but if you're practicing imperfectly, then that makes that more likely to occur as well. It seems to be a lot in common with rowing and swimming. Like you're propelling through water, holding the water is
and trying to stay long,
yes,
hold as
try to
much as
stay
you can.
long and to do it as fatigue increases, and then to do that under it's all the same stuff. I think it's just obviously it's all the obvious ways is different, and that you're doing it usually with other people
Yeah,
is a complicated, but I think because it's physically challenging, that's the thing that people pay the most attention to. But the closer you get towards the top of the pile, more people are paying attention to exactly what you described, which is how well can I do this? Because
yeah,
everyone's doing it hard. That's the price of entry. Like that doesn't, we're not even going to
yeah,
talk about that because that goes without saying. All right.
yeah,
So now that we've got that covered, how well are we doing things?
yeah.
Um, did you get good technical coaching as you got into this, or was this something that you felt like you developed yourself?
I think I got lucky early on with like a good foundational technical coaching. Um, Not to say I got unlucky further down the line, but it's like
Yeah, 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 I know.
as
Yeah, yeah.
as you develop as an athlete, it's less so about the inputs that you're receiving
Yes.
and probably more so about how you can translate them into a way that makes sense to you, but also how you can provide feedback that helps that input.
Yeah, it's more of a circular,
Yeah.
this is
But
how
at
I'm feeling,
a
this is what
young
I'm saying.
age, it's just it's very hard to get that out, what I'm feeling, what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
And it's something that you have to learn to do as you get older. Um, and then I don't know, you can push the limits of that and what that looks like in your daily training environment. Um, some of the things I loved about training were actually those elements and creating, I guess, almost like parameters around what we were trying to achieve on technical elements. Um, so we would set goals or benchmarks under fatigue. It's like this is the metric that you have to hit for like a turn time or whatever. And if you do it with the correct technique or number of kicks or whatever it is, that's a thumbs
So
up.
there's
If
more skill than just speed.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, cool.
Um, and I like to punish myself with, if you don't do it, you repeat it until you get it done. So
Do you
it's
think that
like
is, I think you say punish because it's sort of thing that makes the most sense, but you're trying to get it right,
trying to get it
you know,
right.
or do you feel like, is there a sense of, can you like impatience with yourself, or is it just a willingness to keep doing it until it's right?
Yeah, I think punish for me probably means different things than to what it means to other people.
So
Like it's
not
not
not literal.
not literal.
Yeah.
I'm more than happy to do the extra rep or
Yeah.
whatever to get it right. Um, and it's just a funny way to say, well, I got to punish myself now,
Well, but it's funny these
yeah.
words, because it's there's punish, but even when someone would describe a race as painful, like yeah, I'm probably funky with that. I'm like maybe discomfort, but there's all these words that depends on how you interpret them, and I'm trying to figure out how you think about it says something about your approach because I'm sure some people would be doing the exact same thing using the same word but thinking about it like it's an actual punishment and carrying some baggage with it because athletes when they have expectations or at least they're holding themselves to a certain standard if they can't get it right then then I failed then it's a very slippery slope to I'm there for a failure and
Yeah.
off we go and doesn't seem to be your story, but I'm sure you've seen that, as have I.
Yeah. Well, I think like in the context of doing, if you're having to do a repeat because you didn't get whatever it was right, and that
Yeah.
is a punishment, it's like, well, if I get it right on this one, that's actually one more than I was meant to do. That's a bit more work. And if I
Yeah.
can do it with like that, it's a bit more fatigue because I've got one more rep under
Yeah.
the belt.
Yeah.
Then I'm
Yeah.
in a better spot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a long precedent for this, whether it's shooting free throws or
Yeah.
it's just whether or not you uh, are insistent on getting things right, and then what your state of mind is as you go about it, because you have to confront all these small failures whilst still thinking of yourself pretty optimistically in order for things to go right in competition. On that note, 2015 into 2016, what were the expectations right around your time you finished the 2015 World Championships, silver in the 800? What are you thinking for next year?
That was a very weird time. I actually got very sick in 2015 at the World Champs there in Russia, and I picked up a stomach parasite, lost like 5 kilos in 3 days or
Not great.
something ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I think I didn't even make the final for the 400. I was swimming like garbage, and I was just like, I don't know what's going
But
on.
that's a big reason. Just, because that's not there. You just well, at least not on the Wikipedia page. It's like, here are the results.
Yeah,
And if you spoke about that at the time, then it doesn't land well. And it's also not relevant moving forward, but it definitely has an impact and it changes the trajectory because at 2015, 2016 is not looking how things went wouldn't have been reasonable aspirations, but there's context. So,
yeah,
it has a massive effect. Even if you didn't race, that could have been on the cards too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so I think the 400 I might have gone in like ranked in the top three or something, and it was like the
Okay.
highest I'd gone into a senior meet, highest ranking I'd gone into a senior
Is that
meet.
just on what you've done domestically or?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
my qualifying time going in.
Yeah.
Um, and so there was like there was a bit of pressure around that, and then I think like I remember not making the final, and everyone's like, what is this guy doing?"
But that's
Um,
still there's still expectations there for you to be in the finals, the other side of it, like
Yeah.
when you're a dirtbag all of a sudden for not making a final in the 400 at the senior world champs, and everyone sees that as like a disappointing result for you. That's probably doesn't feel good at the time, but it says something positive about how people think about how you should be swimming.
Yeah, that's a good point. Um, and then the 800, I think that by that point in the week, I was feeling a bit better, managed to get on the podium. I think there was a 1500 in there as well, and that probably wasn't great either. And so I kind of left that world champs being like, I didn't know exactly what was wrong with me. I just knew that I'd been a little bit sick, lost a bit of weight. So there was like this 3 month period where I was trying to figure it out, doing all the tests in the world. Um, Ended up taking a antibiotic like for the parasite to clear it out, but obviously it clears everything out
Yeah, all
inside
the
you
good
as well.
bacteria.
Yeah, all the
Yeah,
good bacteria.
yeah.
So I was crook for like 3 months. I remember going to training and the day I got through 3K, like that was a big day. And usually I would do 7+K.
So you're dragging ass for a while.
Dragging ass big
Yeah,
time.
yeah, yeah.
And this is like now, 9 months out from
This is pretty
the
important
Olympics.
chunk of time to be
Yeah,
like building a lot of volume.
yeah. And so I reckon if you had spoken to me 2014, started 2015, I would have said, the 1500 is my best shot in Rio. And just with all of this going on, it became pretty clear that there's not enough time to get enough volume in to have
So
a
that's
big,
what that was. That's
yeah.
how what you narrowed your focus on the shorter events just simply because you weren't well enough to do the volume required to.
Well, it was get as much, like, go as far down the volume line as you can,
Yeah.
but also we're going to make sure we have speed in here ready to go for a 400 or a 200 as
Stuff that you
well.
hadn't previously, or was it you?
Probably just a bit more focus on
Yeah.
it. For me,
Okay.
it was always very hard balancing the distancey stuff and the speed stuff. The speed
Yeah.
stuff was very hit and miss. Like some days I'd rock up and it would be so on, and then some days it would just be non-existent. And I couldn't tell you why.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, we probably built the speed stuff a bit more in the lead up to that, and I think like the public perception going into real swimming media or whatever it
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
um, was like the 1500 is where Mac is probably going to make a push. And trials did well in the 400 and the 1500. So going into Rio, it was still, 1500 is Mac's thing. Um, but in the back of my mind, it was always like 400 is day one. I got a bit more speed than usual. I've been practicing this race plan. We've been putting a lot of energy into it. It's feeling good. So I think that that whole 12 months in the lead up probably set me up quite nicely for someone going to their first Olympics with what could have potentially been a fair bit of pressure.
Mm.
Um, because I was able to almost like just sidestep it and do my own
Yeah.
thing and go under the radar a little bit in a slightly different event. And it just felt like I was
Especially
swimming
because the
my own
timing
race.
of it, like that was at the start. So low pressure. This is a warm up. We'll see how it goes, which
Yeah.
at the Olympics is not usually the case, but in that context, that's what it was. How did you say how you feel afterwards? You probably spend the rest of your life trying to figure that out, but then having to prepare then for the 1500 when no matter what happens, you've like it's for better or
Yeah.
worse, like you've got this, you'll always have it. It's a thing you'll always be able to hang your hat on. But it was the side project in a
Yeah.
way. In a way,
In a way, yeah.
yeah,
Um, why I still really wanted to do well in the 1500. Like I really love that event. Um, and at the trials had swum a time that was like in the top couple of seeds. So I knew it was still a pretty good shot, but didn't know exactly where. Um, in hindsight, like looking back at that week, I probably underappreciated the just like the emotional
Mm.
toll that winning takes on you. Like it's insane how much energy it wipes out.
All
And
the
you,
interviews, is like people, people in
yeah,
Australia, there's only going to be X many gold medals in any given game. So if you win one of them, we're going to want to talk to you.
yeah. And like I feel like I did a good job of, putting the blinkers on. You that night of the 400, you do some interviews, you whatever, chat to everyone. It's nice, it's fun. And then it's 7 days before the 1500 or whatever, because it's a full week later. And you just kind of put your head down, lock that 400 away or that medal away, and just focus on whatever the next thing is. But still, just somewhere deep inside of you, it just like chips away your energy somehow. And maybe it's the energy of trying to lock it away. Like, I don't know, maybe you're better to lean into it. But I remember at the end of the week thinking, I don't know how Michael Phelps did this when he does 8 in 1 week. Like
Yeah.
to compartmentalize the energy from each of them and focus instantly on whatever the next one is.
Well, at least you know what did it feel like at World Junior Championships when you won all those medals, because at least one of us has some experience, like Michael Phelps winning a lot of medals at a swimming comp, and that's you. So imagine if, just to speak for you, every Olympics was like that for him.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think like that meet at Junior Worlds for me was almost like an out of body experience. It felt like I'd figured out how to race and figured out my personality and how I wanted to race, like what my style was. And I was just like of an age where I could back up events just day after day and
Yeah,
like long events, 800s, 1500s. Like you couldn't stop me for that week.
yeah, yeah.
Which I imagine is what Michael Phelps has at, 28 or however old he was. Yeah.
I have to ask him.
Yeah.
At least in rowing, for the most part, there's this is one shot at it.
Yeah.
Whereas, well, it's one of my slight bugbears with swimming, that if you're a 200, 100, 200 meter freestyler, you've got the relays, the medley relay, and then the one and the two, and you kind of got 5 shots at a medal for doing very small differences, variants of the same thing. Whereas in most other sports, it's not that. Are swimmers aware of that?
It's my bugbear as well as a
Okay.
distance swimmer because I don't have
Oh.
the opportunity to swim the
Yeah,
four
but
by
mate,
one or
there's
yeah.
still like there's no, butterfly 1500 meter. Like if you're a distance freestyler, that's nice that you've got that though. That's the other side of it.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
I mean, do swimmers know? Do you guys know that you've got like I don't want to say unfair shot of the honeypot, but it's some variant of that, because I wouldn't have mind like if there's no backup events in most sports, and some of it's even more cutthroat. In rowing, there's heats and a repechage. So
yeah,
if it doesn't go right, you do have in principle, second shot at it, which is better than some. But in swimming, you can have a whole event that just doesn't go terribly, and then if you can go through this sort of psychological cleansing, then right over here, and you haven't even had to train maybe different strokes, maybe not different energy systems. If you're a 100
yeah.
meter freestyler and butterflyer, these aren't
They're aware, but you have to talk to a 100-meter freestyle swimmer because they have the most opportunity.
okay. Is there
Um,
something about those, like the one thing that would provide me comfort, it would be if you were like, well, those guys, they train harder than everyone, but I don't think that's the case.
they train differently. Yeah.
Well, is it? I mean, I have seen there's been a bit of a evolution when it comes to focus on quality as opposed to volume. So is that difference getting more significant now?
It's getting more significant. And I think it's actually, it's meaning that people are specializing even more. Like I
Mm.
think if you look at swimming historically, like a Susie O'Neill or a Dawn Fraser or even a Grant Hackett or Dan Kowalski, like they were winning medals in multiple events
Yeah.
on the world stage. And just to have someone that's able to do that now is so much more rare.
Yeah.
Like I
So there'll never
think
be a Phelps again, kind of.
I don't want to rule. I hope there
Yeah,
is because
you do. Yeah,
it's
yeah.
unreal.
It's the
Um,
nature of elite sport. It gets more and more specialized, and there's less of these, yeah, swimmers that, or let's say a runner. Back in the day, there was potential for someone to do the 1, 2, and 400, whereas now that's
yeah.
less likely.
I mean, maybe you could have a crack, but it's a gamble, right? Because
Yes.
do you want to be very good and have a better shot at one thing, or do you want to
Well,
spread
that's
yourself?
the
Yeah,
question. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it is always. But it seems like in swimming, the fatigue that's not generated by swimming, and it's in part because of the volume that you guys do, and so you're prepared for it, and it self-selects to the point where these are the ideal body types and personalities for this sport, and then all of your meets are you're training to do these multiple events, and it's not load bearing, so it seems like there's literally just more shots added. But if over time it does get everything will get more and more elite, so there'll be less and less athletes that can do
yeah,
multiple events.
yeah. I think even if you like that thought of more and more elite, if you think about that in progression from learn to swim to high level, you like when I was a junior at like maybe a national age or whatever, I would swim 9, 10 events. Like that's just the thing that you do in swimming because you're learning to race. It's good like fitness training, whatever. You're
Yeah,
figuring out all the tactics, you're trying different events, different strokes. So you just kind of take everything on.
exposure.
Yeah. Um, but then yeah, as you progress, it's you get just more and more specialized.
Yes, relatively. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's good for us. I mean, us as in Australians, because this is a sport we take seriously and do well in, and therefore is held in high esteem. Did you? I mean, I guess if you spent some time being grateful for all of the circumstances that have occurred in your life, one of those is that this sport that you've both fell into and evidently well suited for, that it's also in a country that really
Well,
likes
he's
swimming.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the thought around it being in a country that really likes swimming, but it's maybe like a country that appreciates sport and has a lot of national pride in sport. Um, and that might just be because of the experience I've had in swimming and their love for swimming, as you say.
Yeah.
But
Well, there's
I
swimming more than I would say both swimming more than most sports, but in particular more than swimming in most countries. So it's a global sport, but there's not a dolphins variant in most countries.
yeah,
It's just the Brazil swimming team and the whatever swimming team. It's not like this, there's no media presence outside of a Phelps or a Riley Gaines, like
yeah,
depending on the circumstance. There's there's those in the US, and then there's some of those in the UK based on combination of results and personality, but the not with the same breadth. Like we grow up with these Susie O'Neills, Libby
yeah.
Trickett's, Kieran Perkins, Grant Hackett, Thorpe, Kowalski, like Klim. You can like a non-swimmer can go
Yeah, they can
on and
rattle
on
them
about the
off.
swimmers they grew up with.
Now I'm feeling like I've underappreciated it, so I'm gonna have
No, no,
to
no, that's
I'm
great though.
gonna
This is
reflect on it as
yeah. They can
I go to sleep tonight. Yeah,
add it to the pile of
yeah,
gratitude. This is
yeah,
on the shoulders of giants, and I know some Australian rowers that have had success at the Olympic Games, and it's one of those things that makes it seem far more conceivable. Like I remember feeling like, oh, it'd be a stretch to get to the Olympics. But by the time we were going, that the expectation would be that if you were Australian rower on the heavyweight man, then you were kind of expected to go get a medal. Now, that doesn't always
Yeah.
happen, but the fact that that's kind of the expectation is only because of the people that have done it before, which, success begets success within a school context. So if their football team tends to win, then the kids growing up, they go, oh, well, winning seems fun and it seems achievable because I can see
Yeah.
that guy at lunch and then also winning on Saturday. And if you never see that, then a lot less likely. So you did have those guys to aim for.
I often say, like going into Rio, my first Olympics, how naive I was because I'd see just Australians go to the Olympics in swimming and they come home with a medal. And it's just like
Yeah,
that's that's what we do.
yeah.
Um, and I don't know, like in the lead up to it, it was like, yeah, I'm gonna go to the Olympics and I'm gonna try and win a medal or whatever. Whereas if you ask like an older Mack Horton has mates that haven't gone well and knows how hard it
Mm.
is, that having that thought seems so much further away.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and now,
yeah, it's really interesting. And now, very well, I'm retired now, so it's
yeah, well,
light
but
years away.
you also like you had it's an unusual career trajectory in that you had this early success, but earlier than a lot. And then whereas a lot of swimmers that at 20 Olympic gold medal, they the expectation would be that, okay, next games we just sort of we keep doing that as long as we're swimming because that's the norm now. But it's a lot more complicated than that. So post Rio, were you thinking, okay, well, I'm 20, feeling pretty good about my swimming prowess. I love the sport. And what were you thinking for that next quadrennium?
There was, I reckon the first year after an Olympics is tough, probably for anyone, but I think like achieving sort of success probably makes it a bit harder because I think as an athlete, you're so programmed to just be like, I've ticked that box. Now what's next? And that was like the biggest box to tick. And then the next box felt so far away. Um, and so there's a period of time where I was like, I like swimming. I want to go to another Olympics, but I'm just like not as motivated
So,
as I was previously. Which I imagine like most athletes probably experience when they come from that height. Um, and so for me, I just kind of like went through the motions for a couple of months because the I was always anchored in the routine and the rhythm. And so it was kind of like if I can just
did you take a
keep
break?
this going,
Like, did you have some time out of the
I had
pool?
6 weeks, which is the biggest break I'd ever had
Yeah.
up until that point.
Did you
Usually it's about
feel
2 or 3
rusty?
weeks here. Coming back, oh yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah, really bad.
how much did you relax? Like, some people, I'm having a break and because everything's been pretty dialed, they're like, I'm not doing that. And some people, nutritionally, lifestyle wise, they're not forcing it to be dialed, so they don't really need to release the gas valve. So people's off can look a little bit like some people are going to be at Revolver 5 nights a week. That's their off. And some people are like, well, I'm just
I
not going to
wasn't a
go.
revolver. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um,
I
but
went to
some,
I went to Europe for 6 weeks and put on about 5 or 6 kilos, I
okay.
think,
So
just
you
in pasta.
were,
Um,
less training volume, a little bit more nutrition
no training
indiscretion.
volume at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
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 And as much nutrition as I could.
Did you feel like at that stage that you're like missing even like breaking a sweat, just trying just work in your body?
Yes, the working in the body and the routine.
Yeah.
That is what I anchor everything in, even now.
Because you're basically
Uh,
like racehorse, racehorse, racehorse. And then and like if you just got a racehorse and like we're not doing that right
yeah,
now. No training, no competition.
And you literally like in an Olympic context, you swim whatever your last race is, heat final. You're probably not cooling down because by that point you're just like, what's the point?
Mm.
And then you're going straight to McDonald's in the village and eating that for an entire week, and you don't know yourself because
Rowing
you
and swimming have that in common, that in its finishes with a good chunk of time left
yeah.
for the wheels to fully come off.
Yeah.
I gained 10 kilos both
In how
times.
long?
Oh, that
In a
week.
week.
Well, it was basically 10 days for us. Our final was on the first Thursday.
A kilo a day.
Yeah. But we've got roughage, we've got water retention, and I like my uniform is
Yeah.
more fitted than it
Yeah.
was. Like it was fitted to begin with, like in a good way.
Yeah.
And now it's not as good. And there was signs of life. Like I actually went to the gym in the village both times, but it was, and I was keeping things I had to keep my body weight suppressed for rowing
Yeah.
to not be, if my set point normally is around 105, that wasn't going to make sense. So 95 was, so this is like any chance for like my body just to go to
Yeah.
what it wanted to. But yeah, so there's always variance of that. And the big thing that you mentioned is that, you've had this, even if it was the goal, even if it was the lofty goal, you still have to deal with having achieved it. And then where's your juice for getting after it? Whereas if you've gone to the exact same event and it hasn't gone that way, then that's all you've got, is you can either be like, well, you're giving up and that's not for me, and that's fine for those people. But for me, didn't get the result, was immediately, after that week,
Yeah.
like
Straight back into
I was
it.
immediately back into it, but
Yeah.
pretty quickly, and like conceptually there was no lack of motivation. So
Yeah.
after you said you're going through the motions for a couple of months, but that's still, you're still at Christmas in the post-Olympic year. That seems pretty reasonable. How did it pick up thereafter?
I think it was, I mean, the intensity and whatever picked up, but like my presence probably stayed was relatively absent for a little bit. And I don't know, it's probably like reflecting not such a bad thing. 4 years is a long time to be
Mhm.
completely present. And so there's no pressure to rush that at all by anyone. And it's because it's very clear that the Olympics is the focus, and whatever it takes to get to the end of the next cycle is what you do. Um, and I think what kind of got me back into it was just coming back to why I was doing it originally in the first place, which is I love it. I love the feel for the water. I love to be curious every day. I love to push myself to the absolute limit. And so once I remembered all of those elements, and that's why I go to training, and I could really start to turn it up again. Um, and a year post Rio, you're fully back into it, full steam ahead.
How was your body feeling at that time?
Um, I think pretty good. I've been lucky with my body. Like it's taken an absolute beating in terms of load and Ks and what have you. Um, but the shoulders have held up. I look after them, but they have held up really well. And then like energy wise, I think because I had such a big break and I was aware that I didn't have to be immediately present. It gave me the space to recharge that as well.
Do you think winning gave you the space to, like, because,
Well, yeah,
yeah, yeah,
like I every other comp pre Rio wasn't an Olympic gold medal,
yeah.
and it was always something to work on, something to fix, something I'm motivated to go and do, and it was straight into it. So like the experience, if it hadn't played out the way it had, would have been very different.
All of a sudden, there's benefit of the doubt because there's not potential anymore. You are someone that can do it because you have done it. So
yeah,
if you're indicating that this is what I think might work for me moving forward right now, then people are going to go,
yeah, yeah.
cool. Yeah, cool. Which if you don't have those results, then that's not how it goes. Just for everyone that's not aware, if that's not painfully obvious, it's not uncommon for an athlete to take some time off after the Olympics, maybe even a year. But the way that looks, the if success has been achieved prior to that, is a lot different than if it hasn't. Even if the need for the break is just the same, because the work that goes into it is very similar. It's just the execution and the results, but then that's what we all live with on the other side.
Yeah. I like to think that the people around you and the system and whatever in sport now, though, hopefully treats that break and that year after similarly. Like the only difference is in how you treat yourself, probably. It's easier said than done, but
Do you think that's the
maybe
case? More like because
I
you and
think
I
it's
just missed each other in terms generationally, London to Rio, but you retired from the sport in 2024, so that's pretty fresh. Have you seen this evolution over time in terms of duty of care and
well, I think it's like a an understanding that I'm not saying give every all the power to the athlete if they know best, because obviously they need input and refining and whatever as well. But there's definitely an element now of like if you need a break or some space, we're not going to destroy you for this season or this 3 month because we have a bigger picture in mind and we want you
yeah,
to make it through to the next Olympics.
yeah.
Um, so I think it probably has shifted a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, if they do things, they, as I say, a national sporting body are doing things better, then they need to be better management of athletes, even if you just entirely put wellness to the side. If you're playing long term, we have these bodies and we're trying to get them to show up at a certain event in a certain way, then it just is prudent to work with those athletes and not to be too dogmatic, which it certainly was in my time. I could say I'm just thinking of moments when there was individual discretion and it was evolving, but it was definitely results based. The better you did, the more of that
I
you got.
I also think like rowing where you're in a boat with a bunch of other blokes as well would be very different because if someone in that boat was having different treatment, you'd
Yeah,
probably be like, why is this? What's going on?
you would, except if those people have won multiple Olympic gold medals, and then it's
Well,
like,
yeah, then
when it's like everyone knows they don't ask, like,
yeah.
and so that all those people, and there's only a handful, some of them, they all have to earn it again every time. So it's not as though it's that all the way through. It's just in certain instances. And one of the coaches of those guys is a coach I had for a while. I'll name and shame because he would happily own this. Noel Donaldson. He would say, if you haven't won, only when you have won your second Olympic gold medal, do you basically get to have an opinion on
Yeah.
rowing. And I'm like, okay, this is me sort of aiming for my second. I've won like in my late 20s. I've been in the sport for over a decade, about as seriously as can be done. And you're like trying to square that away. And you're
Yeah.
like, I feel like I have an opinion. Maybe it's not, but yeah, that's kind of the tone expressed overtly and otherwise.
If only you had more rowing events, you could have knocked those two out in one
It
games.
would only be if the events, if the duration, if it was 1,000 meters instead of 2,000 meters, it would be far more likely than that we would be sitting here as two Olympic medalists. But it's not. And the part of the curiosity I have with someone, like, of course, the people that win at the Olympic Games are going to be more likely to be in the sports that best suit them. But that wasn't really obvious for me which sport that would be. I remember even 4 years prior to Beijing, I was at college in the US, and the guys in the US national team were in our boathouse at Princeton. And I saw those guys go to Athens, win a gold medal in the men's eight. And I'm like, I know those dudes.
Yeah.
That seems achievable. So I told my parents I graduate 2006. That's what this is what I'm going to be doing. So don't have like super high expectations for me, like getting on LinkedIn, and
Yeah.
it's probably pre-LinkedIn, but doing any of that, because I was just going to go live in Canberra and row a boat and try and do that as earnestly as possible. But up until then, I was thinking, I would like to be very excellent at sport, at a particular sport, like best in the world, and represent Australia and do it at the Olympic Games. So I just wasn't sure what sport that would be.
What else was on the cards?
Oh, mate, it was like speed skating. I was like, maybe I could do track cycling.
Yeah.
Um, Up until year 12, it was, rugby was an option, but by then, because I'd sort of focused more on this endurance, I'd lost some size. So I was, in the end, I was like, rowing's even if it's not the perfect option, it's the best option. And then you're thinking, like a lot of athletes that might not be perfectly suited, you're doing the same thing, which is how do I get good at this? But I'm knowing I'm giving away various advantages to other athletes here that I'm just going to have to overcome. And then by the time you are at the level that you're at, if you're beating these people, then there's no reason to think you can't do it at the highest level. But that was always a deficiency. So no conversations took place. And no, I said 191 is the threshold for talent ID for rowers.
Yeah.
Like, I'm 186, so that wasn't happening.
Yeah.
Like, no one's interested. So you kind of just need to be undeniable. And there's good oarsmen that are my height or thereabouts, but it's just not what you'd aim for. Just like there's certain swimmers that you can see, okay, they're still pretty quick, but they don't have the perfect genetics for this, whereas other people do. Do you guys have people that have all the attributes and you can tell, but they're still slow or not? They're slower than they ought to be.
Yeah. But I think generally they're always the younger athletes
Okay.
because they will probably get filtered out as the sport progresses. Like
Yeah.
their life, school, whatever will get in the way. Or they'll realize they don't have the fight or the whatever it is to push them all the way. But like in terms of technical ability, it's oozing in Australia. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Um,
And so many sports to choose from and such an infrastructure.
yeah, yeah. Um, did you ever think about like you went down the rowing path, but if you went down another path, how far it would have gone? Or did you ever think about changing path?
Yeah. Yeah. Between Olympics, I was like, I wonder, I was still thinking maybe I could do speed skating. I was like thinking, okay, well, long track speed skating, there's not ever been, I don't want to get this wrong, but I don't think there's ever been an Australian, mostly because it requires a 400-meter track.
Yeah.
And there's only a handful of those. Like I think in North America, there's two or three or four. So maybe one or two in each of, so they're rare. In Amsterdam, they've probably got a couple. So you then would have to go, I'm like looking into this, emailing dudes at like imagine 2010 Australian speed skating website.
Yeah.
There's not the infrastructure. They didn't have a wellness coordinator, as I'm sure that they do now. Um, uh, and so there was like hey, this is how you would go about it. And this is as I'm still pretty good at this other thing. Like
Yeah. And like still
Uh,
going to training for it and
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, and like I'm not wasn't any less intent behind it because I think you could. It didn't suck any of the energy out of it getting after rowing, but I also ran a marathon. Like I just want to see what my body could do. So ran a marathon despite not having any elite ambitions. It's all equally interesting to me, but I wanted to, if possible, find something that I was well suited for and therefore had increased likelihood of being excellent at. But I also had to go, okay, let's see, 6'1", 105 kilograms with pretty average hand-eye coordination, a bigger than useful aerobic system for someone that's of that frame, but not the fast twitch muscles to really do anything interesting with it. So kind of just like too heavy and stocky for endurance sports, but
Yeah.
right. So it didn't really, and then you just make the best of it, as anyone
I
does.
think
Like,
this sounds genetically blessed to me, but in your head it sounds like genetically cursed, I
well,
reckon.
mate, for like, I'm not complaining because it's
Yeah.
this is. I also had to look at the reality and go, okay, when I'm fully tuned up, like I've got some attributes here that I
Yeah.
also in my sport, which is the thing that I was trying to get good at. I could look at guys that I train with every day that were actual complete freaks in either in their they have the right attributes in terms of their 6'6", good wingspans, big VO2s, right mindset, and all different variations of that. Biggest Josh Dunkley Smith, who has the 2K world record,
Yeah.
biggest VO2 ever recorded at the AAS. And when you know that's what it is and that's what the numbers are, that's the guy that you're training with and against in training, then you know what the deficiencies are as well. Because your coaches will, they'll be like, bloody hell, Josh is good. And you're like,
Thank
I'm just,
you.
just doing my best. I'll just do my
Yeah.
best. They also means that like if anything's close, they're going to select that guy because there's a potential deficit. So it's like all going well, that guy will be better than that guy. And then that's kind of what it is for the most part, unless you have results that are undeniable.
Yeah.
And so I am at peace with this, but this podcast has compelled me to talk with people that have had, part of the reason I'm talking with them is because they've had success that is notable at the big dance. And I didn't. And so it comes up, because you and I might have this thing where people, if they get wind that you go to the Olympics, they go, "Oh, how'd it go?" And then for you, it's one conversation. For me, it's another. But I don't. I'm at peace with it now. It's like,
I was gonna ask.
yeah, yeah. I realized that I would if I like imagine the. I mean, curious for you because you've got this thing that you did that you're known for. Whereas I'm not known for that if I'm known at all. It's not for success at the Olympic Games. And so there's no scope for me to hang my hat on the things that I've done to rest on my laurels because there's not significant enough to do that. But for you, it is to an extent. So that sense that you had in the first few months after Rio, where it's like, oh, I've climbed the mountain. Like I've got to get the juice to get going after the next thing, even if it's the same thing. But then you kind of got that for the rest of your life. And knowing Olympic medalists as we do, whether they win gold or not doesn't really indicate whether they're going to be successful in the rest of their lives at all. So you've seen people that have won golds and they're doing great things and they're great people. And then you see people that have won golds that are struggling.
Yeah.
So it doesn't guarantee you anything at all. It just means that it went well and
On one day in your life.
yeah, and that person gets to know that the thing that they thought they were capable of that they actually were and are. So it's not nothing, but I also realize it's not everything either. And then that's how I
Do you feel like you felt like you're capable of something and you never fully got it out?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I would say that I also feel that.
Is that because after Rio, your, well, my expectations would be that, okay, this is a repeatable performance that, we've got world championship golds and Olympic golds to come, like that you could be
Yeah.
decorated in history of Australian sport as a multi-time Olympic gold medalist, and it didn't go that way. So you've had to come to terms with like the highest of highs, and it wasn't at the end of your career, so it wasn't building, 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 but it was this peak that you're then measured against. But it's not always that easy to put it all together. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. So you've had your own version of this.
Yeah, I think when I Tokyo was like a completely different experience with COVID, all of that. Being in Victoria, training was a nightmare. Had 11 weeks out of the water, longest I'd ever been out of the water my entire career. And so it was like impossible to plan and put a good run up together when ideally you want 4 years. So that was tough in that sense. It was like being in a plane crash and just being a passenger and
Do you
doing
think that
everything
really
that.
did like for Victorian swimmers, that was there a collective of you that must have had some version of the same fate?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I think there were two Victorians that ended up going, but like to even get to the Olympic trials in 2021, they were in South Australia. You couldn't go from Victoria to South Australia directly, so you had to do like 2 weeks in Queensland to then go to South Australia, and then you couldn't go home before you had to go to staging to then go to. So like it was just all so much harder and so like so many unknowns, and the ideal in elite sport is as many known
No.
knowns as possible. Particularly around like when meets are going to be and when your
Yeah.
training blocks are going to be like they're things that you're generally are able to control. You know, there's some things you aren't going to be able to control around race day, whatever, but those sorts of things make a big impact. So that was tough. But then like in terms of not getting out everything, I just always felt like I trained at a level and had a level in me that I never got to fully take for a spin, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah. But
2019, 2020, he was feeling good. COVID hits 2 years later, bit older, blah, blah, blah. Even later on in my career, it's like I know I have this engine, but now the shoulders are getting old and it's just like this. I want to get it out. I can do these things in training. Um, so I don't
you
know,
were still
maybe.
performing like at your, if you say I could still do it, like were you getting better as you and not being able to put it together at the right time, or were you finding it harder to get better and then you kind of have the knowledge and wisdom of how to get better, but you've got a body that's sort of an overall career that's drifting slightly in the other direction. Like you're trying to catch it on the enthusiasm and fitness and
Yeah.
circumstance all at the right time.
I reckon it's training wise, pretty steady upwards, probably tapered off in like the last year or so. Just because my body got to a point where like it couldn't handle any more load or the load that it needed to
Is
with it.
that,
And
and
so
so you
it's
mentioned the shoulders, but what does that look like?
uh like
More like more specific, like is it shoulders or was it more than that? Was it like the system?
system,
Yeah.
neural system, like the neural fatigue was unbelievable. And then getting like a bit of tendonitis. I was getting tendonitis in my forearms just from the constant load going through the shoulders and into the hands for the catch. So that was making it,
Accumulating.
yeah. Um, and then I had another thought that I can't remember what I was going to
Well, we
say.
were talking about your opportunities to get it all out
Uh,
before you stopped.
it got harder and harder to line it all up.
Yeah.
Like when you're young, resting's a bit easier.
Yeah.
You probably have a bigger fresher window of freshness or
Yeah.
whatever window of speed. Um, and just as I was getting a bit older, and my whole career, I was like trying to balance both ends of having a bit of speed for the 200, 400, and then also the endurance base, the 15. And it just, the window got so tight as I got a bit older in age.
And you were dealing with a fair amount of shit off the water as well. Um, I wanted to touch on it. There's this controversy with a Chinese bloke, and as far as I'm concerned, you called a spade, and you acted in principle with how you saw things. And that's kind of all there is to it. But then that's not all there is to it because the blowback for you was substantial. And I don't, the only reason I'm being vague about the particulars is because I, having looked into it, think that it was pretty clear cut in that both in 2014, nefarious things were going on. In 2019, that was just like clear violations of, and then the Court of Arbitration for Sport and WADA and Chinada, like it's just a complete mess and speaks to the overall mess that is the sports anti-doping system. And you were making a principled stance based on what you knew in the what we all knew, but I'd imagine you probably had additional context that made you feel more, even more resolute about what you thought was going on. And all that being the case, I think you went about it almost the exact way that I would have. So I don't feel like you did anything wrong, but in the eyes of many, you definitely did. And having a look at just recent stuff you've shared as a retired swimmer on Instagram, they're not letting it go. So this is a thing that you've had to deal with for years.
Ye
And did that have an effect?
I I think the answer is I don't know because it's all I know now. Um,
Well, you would know because you would know on a given day, is this a thing you have to think about?
I'm pretty good
Uh,
at not thinking about it,
okay.
but it's like the same as day one of the 400 in Rio to day eight of the 1500. I was pretty good at not thinking about
Yeah. Yeah.
day one,
Yeah.
but there's probably a bit of you deep inside with that subconsciously working through something. Um, and like most days I don't think about it, to be honest. Most days it doesn't touch me or affect me, but then there's days where it's like this is a bit strange. Um,
Is that what there's a difference between it registering as that's a bit strange because it is, and it seems like a bunch of lunatics. So it's like you can't put too much stock in the opinions of a lunatic, but it does register nonetheless. So are you thinking, oh, that's a bit strange, or are you thinking, how am I have to deal with this strange person?
well, it probably registers because it's like it's no longer on a phone screen. It's in my life, if that makes sense.
Is this because of the
Uh,
stuff that's actually happened?
yeah.
That's and so can you talk about some of that? I know you've had like you actually your stuff fucked with someone detached your seatbelt.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. Undid all the
Uh,
seatbelts in my car.
did someone throw a brick through?
Concrete in the pool, glass in the pool, uh,
Is that was your place or your
break-ins,
folks' place?
a bit of everything.
So
Um,
variants of all of this, just
yeah. And then I think like this all contributes to a like a low underlying anxiety and suspicion of everything. Like if something strange happens in the street, I'm instantly like, do I need to think about that a little bit more?
yeah.
Um,
Because you seem a very composed and rational person, but you were speaking to the accumulation of fatigue is a part of nervous system management issue, and then you need to think of the inputs, and then there's those of an athlete normally, but if there's this low hum, I doubt that it.
Doesn't have an effect.
Yeah, yeah, and I think in particular, as an athlete, you would have been great for both compartmentalizing and thinking in terms of, well, this is just necessary for me to get after the thing that I want to do. But when it involves people that you really care about that didn't make the stance that you did, that didn't sign up for any of this, and that was the thing that I'd imagine you can't really avoid, even if you can feel okay with how it affects you.
Yeah, that is the bit. Like, throw it at me, whatever. Doesn't really matter. My action, my consequence, whatever that is. But you're right. It's when it's people around you and people that matter to you that it's uh more difficult. In saying that, though, my people have done a very good job of keeping that quite quiet. Uh, and it's kind of like this is what you need to know. This, like, we'll just keep you on a need to know
Yeah,
basis sort of thing.
yeah.
And I think, like, by design, it's a conscious decision. Um, so I'm grateful that they take on the loads that
But
I
even
don't.
that, like you then have to carry that energy that that's what they're doing on your behalf.
Yeah,
Almost
well,
like they're sparing you because I guess the assumption then is that you are wearing that when it fucks with the people you care about.
yeah. There probably there was never like a conversation about who is carrying the load though as well. Like,
Yeah.
we fell into a groove, and that groove has been comfortable enough to do what I need to do,
Yeah.
essentially. Yeah.
And does it feel like the dust is settling at all?
Uh, I mean, like, compared to 2019, 2020, absolutely. But it's like still ongoing for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you felt like, for the most part, that it was not a thing that had an overt effect on your swimming performance, is it a thing that you carry any frustrations that it's part of your story now?
It's a good question. Um, do I carry the frustration? I don't think so. I the frustration probably came more earlier on whilst I was swimming, just because of the paranoia that I had. Like, my biggest fear my entire swimming career was that I would test positive to something, and it would be something that I didn't know that I ingested. Um, and so I would go to, like, extreme lengths to make sure that I knew that everything was going into my body, I knew what it was.
It's
Um,
which is tricky though when you're on the road, which you are a lot, and there's cafeterias and
yeah, it's like wiping down your knife, forks, spoons, your tray, all your plates, making sure you're eating from the same communal thing as everyone else
so
is.
at least everyone else's.
Yeah, not taking the first scoop, um, locking all your supplements, toothpaste, everything away,
It
leaving
doesn't
it.
mean though that you have to, if you're engaging in the behavior of it wasn't for these reasons, this would be because it's just like a psychological disorder. Like that's how this would present in every other.
Yeah.
So
Any little holes in the wall, duct tape over them. Because, when you're in a village, the walls are a bit shabby sometimes.
yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, that. that can't be nothing. Like if we go, oh, it's all important and that can't be like you have to put it in this category of well, it is what it is, and so you just get on with it. But we're talking how it went now, which is so you're on the other side, and maybe the this is something that you're gonna be unpacking for a while, and it's not a it's maybe it's never going to be that clear cut, but I think of it in terms of you know Peter Norman at the time, not well received anywhere domestically, internationally, and then he got banned for.
Yeah.
Now I know at one stage you got was it is it FINA?
Yeah, I think they yeah, I think they wrote me a warning
Yeah, they
letter.
like told you to pull your head in,
Yeah.
right? Which
I've been
and
meaning to get a copy actually. I
yeah,
was yeah. Thank you for reminding me.
yeah, happy to, nice to have. And you've got this whole country of that's shitting itself about it, and it's the second most populous country on earth. But over time, if this is part of your story, I would believe that it's going to be seen as a in an increasingly favorable light over time.
Thank you, I think.
Yeah, well, it's just it's less of a compliment and more of a what I'd put my money on, and I'll be curious to see how it evolves. And it's always something nebulous when it's just the court of public opinion, but it's hard. Like I just agree so much with both your stance and the way that you went about it because it was um overt, but both overt and subtle. Like you went about it in the most subtle way possible, but then also I don't know what else you could have done to like you could have just said, "Oh, I don't like this. I don't like it" at a press conference.
People say that all the time.
That's what
Like,
you should have done.
no, people do say stuff at
Oh
press
yeah,
conferences.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah, 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 yeah.
I don't like it, I don't agree. Blah
And
blah blah.
it was ongoing, and it's but there's both the principle of it, and then there's the competitive element, and I probably guess that the principle was more important to you because I think you would probably take all comers if the landscape was more in one that you could put faith in the system, which isn't the way that it is.
Yeah. I often get asked and often ponder that because I came second when I didn't stand on the dais. It's like, would I have done it if I had won? And I think the answer is yes.
You
But
think so?
it's very hard to know. Um, there's probably a parallel universe somewhere where Mac is living that out. Um,
In the many worlds, yeah, there's infinite versions where there's one where you won gold and you didn't stand on the podium. There's one that
yeah,
you stood on top of the podium and went,
yeah,
there's that too. There's all the variants. One where you came fourth.
yeah.
You
I don't want
know,
that one. Yeah,
no, and well, this is our timeline. This is the
yeah,
one in which you came second, and it went the way that it
yeah.
did, and
I think the thought of the action was already seeded pre-result,
yeah.
and the intent probably wasn't solidified until after the race, but it was probably also seeded well before, which makes me think that regardless,
Were you thinking 2014 onwards, things just like is just a straight up sus, and then that was the straw in the proverbial camel's back?
absolutely, like it was so blatant.
Smashing
It's
the
as
vials is,
that's as blatant as it gets.
and then the fact that there was any sort of,
Question over it.
yeah, I was like, guys, this is
Yeah.
because the 2014 the way it was done is iffy as, but there's some sort of plausibility there. It has to also be with the understanding there's a historical precedent with certain countries in certain sports. And I don't think either most people don't know or they're not willing to discuss the disparities in anti-doping internationally because there's what happens at an international competition, but then there's the whole chunk of the year where athletes can be, if it's state sanctioned, what would that look like
Yeah.
most of the year? And then we're just expecting the goodwill of these countries that we're not otherwise on good terms with to be doing their best in defiance of their own competitive aspirations. It's like doesn't make a lot of
It's a good
sense.
way to put it.
It just yeah. I mean, we know certain countries, and not every athlete from each of those countries is tainted by merely the nation of their birth, but there is a historical precedent. And I saw some
In
iffy ass stuff in Beijing, I tell you.
in
Yeah.
saying all of this though, I should make it clear that I don't blame him. It's he would have lived a life that makes him think or believe certain things, same as we live lives that make us think and believe certain things. And in his world, that is normal or to be done or whatever. Um, so it's yeah, that's not his fault.
No, but this is the same version of this is the way of thinking where we're not like, do you believe in willpower?
Yeah,
So you think that you have discretion over your, do you think you have free will?
actually, I don't know. To an extent,
To what extent? Where does your free will come from? Give me an example where you think you have free will.
maybe I don't. I don't know.
No, I'm just like you, because you think, okay, well, I chose with free will to have this conversation. And I go, well, the person that decided to choose to be willing to have this conversation is you're a result of your biology and circumstances. And at what stage did the Mac that you're thinking of claim ownership of this organism that can then start making choices on its own, as opposed to those coming from the within that's not within control?
But are you a product of just so many accumulated inputs over your life? Like, can you have free will within a system? Like, I don't know.
Well, something to reflect on. Because it means if you like, you don't blame him because he was in a system, he was then probably some, by all accounts, also didn't carry himself that well, but then you could say, okay, well, he was a young athlete in a tricky situation, and but he was also just a product of his environment and genetics in much the same that all of us were. And yet when people are assholes, we don't kind of entirely excuse their behavior.
Yeah.
And I think it's, gracious of you to not hold the man entirely accountable. And he's certainly not accountable for all of the asshole behavior that's happened since. But it does raise the question. I just have a curiosity as to what extent people think that they're, and I'm not so resolute that that people don't have free will. I just think that when people believe they do because they want to, because they feel like they ought to, or they have some sense that they do. But when you go, okay, but show me how you do, then
Yeah.
it sort of falls apart pretty quickly. So just
Yeah.
as a
I'm
thought
gonna
exercise. Hey, we're not going to get to the bottom of it today either.
no, we
Um,
need another 3 hours.
yeah. It's probably a good place for us to pull up stumps. You're losing lighting
I know. I was
dramatically.
thinking about going to turn the light on, but then I have to take the earphones out. I was like, it's too hard.
Yeah, yeah. Well, mate, I wouldn't. I do have one question now, given that you retired last year and you've got this whole life ahead of you, but you're still young and outside of shoulders and tendinopathy, you seem like you present like you're in good working order. What is, do you have any, as a non-sporty person, aspirations to like do something different with your body, or is it, I know you like surfing and you can do that with, depends on the conditions. It's a lifestyle as much as it is a sport.
Yeah.
Do you think in terms of fitness as or is your fitness like in order to stay healthy now?
Uh, fitness for me now is like sanity because it's what has grounded me for so long. Like if I don't wake up in the morning and do something, my day is a write-off. I fall
Okay.
apart. Um, which is probably not a great thing to be dependent on, but it's literally all I've known for 17 years.
Yeah,
And
I get
coming
it.
out of swimming, it's interesting because it's a sport where you're so locked into swimming only. Like in rowing,
Mm,
you cycle and do other things probably a bit more than we
yeah.
would in swimming. And so I remember like while I was swimming, oh, I wish I could just go for a ride or I wish I could go do this or whatever. And now I'm just overwhelmed with choice and not enough time, essentially. So it's like, what can I
Yeah.
fit as much as I
Yeah. So
can
it's like a
in?
civilian, like everyone that's just on the same sort of, okay, well, I know that I feel better if I exercise and there's all these modalities and
Yeah,
what do I do with the time I have available?
yeah. And it's like I'm getting better now at designing it so that it fits in pretty efficiently with life. Like cycling to work or whatever is like the easiest way to tick that off every day and a couple of gym a week. I still swim a little bit, believe it or not. A lot of people leave it and hate it, but I still love it. Um, Kayaking, surfing, a little bit of running. I've done 2 half Ironmans since I
Oh,
retired.
cool.
Uh,
It's I know the context in which you're saying it. It's pretty casual, but for others, that's not nothing. Like these are some not nothing. That was like last year that you stopped swimming, so that means you've done
yeah,
2 half Ironman since
yeah.
mid last year.
Well, I don't know. There's a bit of carryover fitness. You don't have to worry about the swim too much. A
Yeah.
couple of big rides and a run, and you're good to go.
Still finishes with a half marathon.
Yeah, the first one I did, that was the furthest I'd ever run.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, good time for it. I like fresh
yeah,
legs. Yeah.
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 But I've also been finding a lot of pleasure in not being prepared properly.
Yeah.
Because when you're an Olympic or high performance sport, it's like so much build up for one day or one event and the process. And I've been enjoying putting myself into things where I don't know what the process is, and it's just a mystery, and I'm just going to figure it out on the day. And so for me, that was the half Ironman. Like I remember the morning, like YouTubing the course to figure out where the transitions were, and it's like that's kind of fun for me to just
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's just not as serious as and the scope for improvement is substantial compared to microscopic.
Yes, yeah. Um, and then I just have like a list of things I'd like to tick off eventually. A couple of big kayaks, a couple of big cycles.
What cycles or
Um,
rides? I mean, if
the
there's a list,
There's a list. There's a thing called the Dirty Warnie from Geelong to Warrnambool. It's like 240K of gravel, which I'd like to do.
nice.
Three Peaks. I don't know if they still call it Three Peaks anymore. In the high country ride, I think it's also 240K, 4,000 meters of riding. I'm sure you've heard of it in this.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then some more like solo adventure things, like a
So still going long.
long. I
Yeah.
can't do the short stuff.
Well, it's all you could. You could be you could just be not good at it. You're still like, but it seems like you're doing what you want to do, which is just the point.
The pleasure is in the unknown, and the unknown only comes after X amount of time.
Yeah. I love
Um,
I love going long. I see the appeal totally. You mentioned that you were doing a clinic. Is that something you do regularly?
not not until recently. I've
Okay.
been considering getting into it more. I I don't know. I kind of in not kind of I do enjoy trying to set up or help set up younger athletes with it's almost like that pathway thing I was talking about earlier. It's like these are the records that you're chasing, and that's the pathway. It's like if I can help these athletes with any shortcuts, any cues, anything technical, just put them in better stead, then I'd love to do that. Um, and that's like the easiest way to do it, right? Like these are everything that I would pass on to them is something that I've had to like learn myself or articulate myself over the years. Whereas I can just hand it to them. They're probably not going to absorb all of it, but if they absorb one or two things, that's a better position than they were in previously.
But then you'll be thinking, what happens if I handed it to them every day? That's a coach, but then that's well, I could do the handover even better, and then you're kind of on the hook, which is more. It's proportionally more fulfilling as well. Because imagine if you get some benefit from a moment or a series of intervals where you're imparting this knowledge, and then imagine you're walking someone through that, like the whole process, and then they have this moment of attainment.
Yeah, but then I have to get back onto like the swimming schedule, which is mornings and
There are
afternoons.
downsides. Then you go into
Yeah.
like, you know, I'd imagine there's better and worse places to visit. Some of the rowing venues that I ended up as a coach, there was definitely a sense of like, why am I back here?
Yeah.
Like I don't need to be here anymore. We'll see. I want us to, I guess, finish this off by saying if there was, a place that people could find you, if there was a reason to, if you're doing clinics, there might be, but if you don't want them to find you,
You can find me. You don't have to find me. Probably Instagram's the best way.
yeah,
It's just at Mack Horton. I'm not on
simple
it
enough.
that much, but if you want to see probably a non-swimming related picture every now and then, that's the place.
Okay, great. Well, Mac, thanks for the time, mate. Really appreciate the chat.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.